Good afternoon, my friends. This is the Grimflayer. Hope you're all doing very well today. We are playing some more Golgari Midrange, and this is the first game with the Dark Confidant build for the channel. The first game with the inappropriately named December deck tech update, because of course it wasn't December when I made it, and it's still not December now, but we're just going to roll with it. I also need to make a quick shout out at the beginning of this video because I'm sure not everybody watches the deck tech. Some people might watch gameplay only. So for those who didn't watch the deck tech, I have to thank my newest patrons. We have 3 people to thank. We have brand new patrons, Teddy, who is a confidant, and Last Air Games, who is an inquisitor. Thank you both so much for supporting the channel. Very generous, very appreciated. And we also have to thank a 3rd patron who's in fact our oldest patron. The first one to sign up was SV, and SV has upgraded, and SV is now a confidant as well. So, like I said, I gave him the shout out during the deck tech. We've got to give him a shout out again. Thank you so much to everybody who supports the channel, whether it be through Patreon, whether it be through liking, sharing, subscribing, feedback. All of it is welcome. All of it engenders my gratitude. So thank you all so much. Now, speaking of patrons, this is pretty funny, this game here, because I actually ran into one of my Patreon supporters who's sitting across the proverbial table from me. I was just kind of going about the game as normal, and somewhere in the course of the first few turns, the opponent messages me and says, "Hey, by the way, I'm so-and-so." I don't know if he wants to, if he wants me to reveal who exactly it is, so I'll refrain from doing so, but it's a patron, and the patron was like, "Yo, Grimflayer, what's up? I'm so-and-so, I'm part of your Patreon," and I just had my mind blown. That's really exciting. So, of course, I had no choice but to make a video out of this. It was just too cool to see a supporter in the wild. So, thanks again, buddy, for your support, and thanks for being a good sport and being the subject of a video here. So, let's get right into the game. Our opponent is keeping 7. Now, our hand is a keep as well. In a blind game 1, we have Painless Mana, including some utility out of the land base. 3 lands, both colors in abundance. Our lands are spectacular, unless we're against Blood Moon or something, but these are the types of things you cannot play around in a blind game 1 when you're evaluating your opening 7. Let's look at the spells. So we have a nice balance of spells to threats, but are our spells good enough? Yeah, probably they should be. The biggest problem here is that they're slow. So we can go, our best curve right now is turn 1 Treetop into turn 2 Scavenging Ooze into turn 3 Liliana into turn 4 Tracker. Now that all sounds pretty good, but what we lack is early interaction to make the Scavenging Ooze good. So if it's a matchup where this is fine just to play out as a Grizzly Bear, and we don't need to interact early to stay alive, our hand is really strong. We have a lot of gas, we have a lot of power. If it's a fast deck that our opponent's on, especially because we're on the draw, this hand might be a little too slow, but again, it's not something you can mulligan in a blind game 1. You just have to keep it and see what they're up to. So, Mountain into Foundry Street Denizen. So, this is almost certainly 8-whack. It certainly looks like some type of goblin deck. And Foundry Street Denizen is a scary turn 1 play. It's kind of like the Flameblade Adept of their deck, since we just had a game against Hollow One. They can take some more actions on turn 1 sometimes, like they can play a Goblin Guide, for instance, just like Hollow One can start discarding things away on turn 1. But it's almost scarier if they just play their 1-drop and pass, right? Because Foundry Street Denizen, of course, gets bigger as other things enter the battlefield, so in conjunction with the Bushwhacker effects, this guy gets really big really quickly. And we will draw an Inquisition right off the top, so of course I was hoping for that or a Fatal Push. I'm very happy to see that. So let's go ahead and lead off on the Inquisition. Alright, our opponent has a really pretty stacked hand, honestly. 2 land is kind of the ideal amount for the 8-whack deck to operate on. They do have a Goblin Guide, they do have a Bushwhacker. They have another Foundry Street Denizen. This stuff, again, is all pretty scary because we're on the draw and we lack high density of interaction. And we have also a Fanatical Firebrand rounding out the threats. So there's a lot there. What do we take? Well, this is actually a reasonable take because, like, you can't cleanly answer it once it's on the field. Of course, in a response to any removal or after assigning a block or after being blocked. I guess not after being blocked because it's a tap ability, but generally it will be sure to get its 1 damage off after it resolves. So, like in a pure technical gameplay sense, this is a card that makes some amount of sense to take, but the power level of the card is just simply not that high compared to some of the other ones. All 3 of these other ones are bigger payoff cards. Goblin Guide, of course, is a burn staple because it's a very efficient attacker in its own right. Goblin Bushwhacker is, you know, kind of half of the namesake of the deck, 8 whack. It refers to these whack effects. Reckless Bushwhacker is the other one that have kicker costs and make the wide board a lot scarier for the turn they enter the battlefield. And then, of course, we already explained how good Foundry Street Denizen is. So, honestly, all 4 of these are reasonable takes, but I think we just have to take the Bushwhacker there. I think, you know, they're going to go wide. There's no real stopping that. Bushwhacker represents the most damage, in my opinion. So, there, yep, this is what we expected them to do. They're going to go Foundry Street Denizen, Goblin Guide, and pass. We draw a Dark Confidant. Oh boy, Bob. You know, you bring you into the fold, we trust you, and now you show up when you are least wanted. You know, I'm exaggerating for effect, obviously. It's not like we could play Tassiger here anyway. And playing Bob there actually would not be the worst, because what are they going to do? Not attack? No, of course they'll attack. Bob can trade with something, it's fine. The big problem with that is that Fanatical Firebrand can just kind of cleanly kill it, and then we don't get to trade with any of the more impressive cards. So for that reason, I think I'm just supposed to pass, get ready to fire off my Assassin's Trophy here. It's the only piece of interaction I have at the moment. Alright. Opponent's going nice and wide. They found another Goblin Guide, so this is pretty bad for us. They're swinging for a disgusting amount of damage, and there is just very little we can do. And the Goblin Guide's not even finding us lands on top of all that. So, yep, we trophy a Denizen, because of course it's the most power right now, and potentially also represents the most power next turn, depending on what else they have and will draw. But either way, it's looking pretty bad. We're on the ropes. They have 4 creatures down. Abrupt Decay's a fine draw, I guess. You know, it's definitely definitely playable here. We're going to get to kill something. Ramanop Ruins. This is a nice card. It's gives them a little bit of reach. It lets them cash in on some of the extra lands they're going to have in the late game if they just need to, you know, get those last 2 points of damage across the finish line. So our opponent's holding back the Fanatical Firebrand. That's interesting. Now the Goblins are doing their guide work well. They find us 2 lands. It might not matter, though. Doesn't look like it will. So, of course, we Abrupt Decay one of the Goblin Guides here. We just have to, you know, even though this could represent more damage down the road, we have to stop the damage now. We have to stop the bleeding now. So we'll kill a Goblin Guide. We're going to take 3. And what does our opponent have? Well, they've got a Goblin Grenade, so that'll do it. We just got turned forward through an Inquisition, an Assassin's Trophy, and an Abrupt Decay. So we had a piece of interaction for every turn that we got to play, and they still T4'd us. That is pretty rough. Pretty rough, and that's an example of just how powerful and explosive this 8-whack deck can be. Now, they are a creature-based deck. They are a weenie go-wide deck. We do have a fair amount of tools in the sideboard against them, so this is a matchup that improves appreciably post-side. And, you know, it's not like we're without tools game one. We had a lot of them. Trophy's not ideal, but it was perfectly fine. The extra land we gave them didn't end up mattering. So, you know, for all intents and purposes, we had a couple abrupt decays. We had a turn one Inquisition taking a key piece. This is all pretty reasonable interaction, but the big thing we missed is, you know, against their board that's just attacking every turn, maybe a Tarmogoyf turn two would have been enough of a wall to incentivize them to peel back a little bit. It's hard to say, but, you know, unless we had a truly nut draw of our own, I don't think we were really going to win that game one on the draw. So, hey, well done to the opponent. Definitely got us, definitely sequenced well, and yeah, we just got overrun. So let's go to game two and see if we can improve post side against 8-Whack. Alright, my friends, game two on the play against 8-Whack. We got absolutely wrecked game one. I'm proud of my buddy, proud of my patron. He really put us to the sword, and there was not much we could do, but we're here. Post side, sideboarding, of course, looks about it like you think it is. Here's a sideboard card here. You just bring in anything that kills things at the risk of oversimplifying. That's really basically what you do, and you take away some of the more painful elements of the deck. I think Thoughtseize is the worst card. Dark Confidant, you know, you might have to leave one in, you know, that's totally fine, but we want to trim on Bob's as well. Yeah, bring in some stuff that stabilizes us more against a deck like this, and of course all the kill spells we can find. And I love this hand. You know, it's a little land heavy and all that, but man, this hand looks really appealing. The land might be totally painless. We might have to shock this in, but hopefully not. And if the land is indeed totally painless, that's a plus in this matchup. Of course, Engineered Explosives has huge X for 1 potential, but we won't get caught out, you know, trying to find the perfect time of this and then just dying, because we have a really nice 1-for-1 spell as well with Fatal Push. We also have one of our absolute best cards in the matchup, Kalidas Trader. We've got this guy's a complete bomb against 8-Whack, and who knows, we might even be able to slow roll a little bit of our removal if they start slowly, or if we find more, to really just end the game using the value of Kalidas. So this is a keep. Even though it's a little land heavy for my liking, it is still a keep, and at least we know we will be able to cast Kalidas on turn 4. Opponent has to take a mulligan. Looks like they are satisfied enough to keep that 6. And here I think, even though there's a temptation to just run this out and make sure we don't have to shock it in, I think I like holding up and threatening Fatal Push here. If they have a turn 1 Goblin Guide, or even Foundry Street Denizen, I might just push. We'll have to see. But opponent leads on a Mog Fanatic. Now, our opponent is a BG Rock player himself, of course, and I don't know his hand, but I assume that the opponent is suspicious of a Fatal Push, so they expose a low priority target and one that they're guaranteed to get at least a ping off of if we try to push it. So, well done there. I think that's a great play, and we will just pass. Liliana the Veil is actually a decent draw. She's much better on the play than on the draw in a matchup like this, and it's looking like our opponent is not just dumping out their hand. Again, I don't know exactly what they have, but they might be trying to play a little bit cagely around removal and make sure they develop the board getting as much value along the way as they can. So for this reason, I'm pretty happy to just play that and pass. You know, there's an argument for running out Engineered Explosives, but again, next turn, if we want to, we can just play it and crack it. Here's yet another target that is not particularly appealing to hit with spot removal. So yeah, I'm not going to. I'm just going to take 2. We're not under that much pressure. I think this is correct to just be really, really patient with our removal. Scavenging Ooze is a pretty good draw. I say only pretty good because right now we don't have much green mana to use, but definitely is a strong one in the context of a matchup like this. If we find more green lands, this will be great. So Liliana the Veil is the clear play here. We get to actually get one of these things off the board cleanly without it pinging us, so that's pretty cool. And of course she's going to die next turn, I would assume, but that is totally fine. This is not a game where we are taking over with Liliana. This is a game where she is just another part of the removal train. So the opponent's got all of these sacrifice creatures. Fanatical Firebrand shows up. Mog Fanatic gets in as well. 1 to us, and Lily's gone. Opponent's got a Goblin Grenade. We'll take 5. Opponent's got another Goblin Grenade. Holy moly. So we just took 11 that turn, and they got rid of our Liliana. That is pretty harsh. But, you know, we are still at 7. It's not like we were at a very low life total to begin with. We are still at 7, and the opponent's down to 1 card in hand. So, you know, actually not bad. Actually not bad at all. Alright, so we've got Tireless Tracker is not the most exciting draw, but it actually could be part of a really cool sequence this turn, which would be Tracker into Field of Ruin making a clue, into Engineered Explosives on 1. That is actually a very tempting sequence, and I almost went through with it. But I think it is still correct to simply play Kalitas, Trader of Get. The only way they can answer this card cleanly, without us getting some kind of value out of it, would be if they have another Goblin Grenade in hand, or another Goblin in hand, and they draw the other half of that mini combo this turn. So they could go play a Goblin, Grenade your Kalitas, and pass. And even then, we're still 2 for 1ing them. So there's really no downside to playing Kalitas in this situation. And even though Tracker into Clue into EE would have been nice, I think just playing Kalitas is nicer. We've got 2 kill spells in hand. We're going to get a ton of value out of this guy. They've got a Burning Tree Emissary into Goblin Guide, so these are some good explosive cards, but not very good in this type of situation where we have stabilized behind a Kalitas. Because they, of course, cannot attack into him, they just pass. Yeah, okay, Blooming Marsh is a perfectly fine draw, because this allows us to go Tracker into land into Fatal Push. But let's see if the opponent's interested in taking a trade first. This might be too tempting to pass up, right? Like, of course, I'm sure they're suspicious for some kind of spot removal, but if I'm attacking with the Kalitas, they must know that any outcome here is satisfactory to me. So maybe they just have to go for it and have to assign the double block. Yeah, looks like they do. Again, I'm sure they're aware that spot removal is likely, but not another line they can realistically take, probably. So that's just so good. We get to just totally blow them out, gain 3 life along the way, make a couple of zombies. This game is just basically over. But we go Tracker into land into Clue for good measure, and yeah, the opponent just scoops it up. So yeah, those Goblin Grenades were a little bit scary. The early plays kind of made our Fatal Push a little bit less appealing, Engineered Explosives a little bit less appealing, but being patient with our interaction was the key there. Liliana of the Veil stabilized our board a little bit, and then we just slammed the Kalitas, and Kalitas just puts the game so far out of reach so quickly in situations like this. So Kalitas did his job very, very well. We had a ton of gas in hand. We still had a clue. Yeah, Zombie Army is well and truly underway, and yeah, definitely just kind of had it all by the end there. So looks like the opponent actually did not have too explosive of a start. Remember, they did Malta 6, so I think they just kept a functional 6. So I kind of wondered whether they were playing around Fatal Push by playing this stuff early. It might be the case they just didn't have a better play. You know, this stuff seems like it showed up later in their hand rather than earlier. So a little bit of an easier progression than they had game 1 to handle, that is for certain. But yeah, Kalitas really showing his power, and yeah, that was fun. So let's go to game 3, see if we can hang with 8-Whack while we are on the draw. Alright, my friends, game 3 on the draw against 8-Whack, and I like our hand a lot. It is once more kind of a little bit heavy on lands, but that's totally fine because we can pitch excess lands to this absolutely beautiful card known as Collective Brutality, which is almost as good in this matchup as it is against Burn. Definitely a strong one, especially when you can lead off with an Inquisition, because The only reason this is not as strong as it is against burn, basically, is that it's not a guarantee that they will have a take with the discard mode. So sometimes you're not sure how aggressively to escalate. But of course, if we get to lead on turn 1 Inquisition, we get to know exactly how to play our brutality on turn 2. And of course, we have yet more interaction to follow it all up. We have the land base is okay. You know, a couple of fetches is not necessarily ideal, but it's not the end of the world. It's better than having to shock in potentially in this matchup. And Treetop Village is going to be a threat at some point in the game, or potentially even a blocker that stops them from getting in with their small stuff. So I like this hand a lot. Our opponent likes their 7 as well, so we're in for a good game 3. I like these mountains, by the way. Onslaught Basics, absolutely Grimflayer MTG approved. 1000% approved. I forgot to mention that. Those are sweet. And our opponent has a Onslaught Basic land into a Goblin Guide, showing us a Fatal Push, but not granting us a land. Fair enough, fair enough. So, yeah, we still want to lead on this Inquisition, even though Fatal Push for the Goblin Guide is totally fine. Well, I think we still want to lead on the Inquisition because, like I said, it's going to make our brutality better, and now we know that our brutality will also have a target next turn. That's a good one to hit. So we see double Fanatical Firebrand, which again is kind of this, you know, just annoying piece that gets a little bit of value out of our spot removal. They have a Lightning Bolt, so we certainly want to leave that in hand so we can take it with the brutality next turn. There's no way they're not going to play something out next turn. Even if they draw a land, they're just going to play 2 somethings out. There's just no question about it. So we leave the Lightning Bolt so we have a target to take with the brutality. So, again, Firebrand is a reasonable take because it's going to get at least some value when it hits the field, but it's not that powerful compared to Legion Loyalist, which is one we haven't seen before. It's got a nice, strong battalion effect, and haste, of course, and then of course, Goblin Guide. So, you know, as good as some of those other cards are, I don't care that much about Battalion in the context of my deck. Like, Legion Loyalist, its effect is very strong against a lot of stuff, but my creatures are usually way too big by the time they're assigning blocks for this first strike trample type stuff to matter. So Goblin Guide just represents the most damage, therefore it is the card I take away. Alrighty. Here comes a Fanatical Firebrand. Opponent's going to get in, and they showed us a Maelstrom Pulse off the top of the Goblin Guide. Still no lands, not a pretty miserly guide, I must say, but our opponent also doesn't have any more lands of their own. They're still on 1, so they have 1 unknown in hand. We're down to 15. We have to fetch here. We're going to go get green. Even though we need double black at some point, you know, we definitely want to be able to fire up the Treetop Village easily. We definitely want green mana for Skoos, so I think green is fine there. If we need to fetch again for double black, we're happy to get a swamp. We've got some beautiful Onslaught Basics of our own, by the way, for those who haven't taken a look at this before. Gotta love it. And yeah, it's Collective Brutality time. Definitely a huge one here. And so we'll pitch away a land and take away the Lightning Bolt. The Drain for 2 is kind of tempting, but honestly, the rest of our hand, like, it's just so good. It's just so good that we don't really want to pitch anything. Even a subpar piece of removal in the matchup like Assassin's Trophy, I'm happy to just kill anything. I truly am. I think we were supposed to hang on to all of those rather than drain them for 2. It's not quite burn. Like, we have to approach the matchup slightly differently, and that includes how to escalate, or not escalate, as the case may be. So here comes that Foundry Street Denizen. We're going to take 1, and we will be past the turn back to us. Opponent is still just on 1 land. Now, we draw Blooming Marsh, so even though we're a little bit negligent about making sure we hit double black, we do have double black. So what are our options here? If we wanted to be mana efficient and just answer things on a 1-for-1 basis, we could play Blooming Marsh, Maelstrom Pulse away the Foundry Street Denizen, and pass. But, that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. But I think I actually just want to take as little damage as humanly possible, so I'm going to plan on a double spell turn. This also insulates me against like a Goblin Guide off the top, something like that could represent even more damage than what's already on field. And, yep, they'll play the Legion Loyalist. They'll play out another Fanatical Firebrand, sure. And they will attack with just those two. Interesting. So they're saving these Firebrands back. That's a really interesting line. Maybe that represents playing around. Yeah, it could be any number of things. We still know that there's a Mog Fanatic in hand, though, I believe. I've been a little bit hasty clicking through this turn. This game, rather, the revealed cards, but I think we're still up to date on that. And yep, we're just going to go ahead with our plan. We're just going to push the 2 highest priority targets. Push and trophy, that is. And in the second main, it's a Mog Fanatic, so we were on top of that. And they've got all the little weenies there, all the things that can kamikaze to ping us. Scavenging Ooze is a heck of a draw. Scavenging Ooze is the one thing that our heavily interactive hand missed, which is a threat. So, I could Maelstrom Pulse one thing. Unfortunately, I don't have 2-for-1 potential here because they can sacrifice this in response. So, that is not ideal. It's certainly not ideal to spend 3 mana sorcery speed to kill just one of these things. I don't mind waiting for a slightly higher priority target now that I'm potentially stabilizing. So for that reason, I'm going to play the Scavenging Ooze out now. It's going to feel bad, if our opponent top decks a Lightning Bolt or something, but if our opponent has to trade in 2 goblins, to kill this thing, that's honestly a win for me. I get to maybe gain a point of life along the way. I'm totally fine with that. Alright, so our opponent has a Legion Loyalist off the top, sure. And will they attack into the Scavenging Ooze? It'll make for an interesting decision if they do, but they do not. Alright, so we move to the end step. Now, this is another interesting decision here. So if I just pass, then I get to untap and start eating a bunch of stuff. But if I just activate now, then what happens? If I activate now, I'm going to gain a life, and if they want to kill the Scavenging Ooze, they have to sacrifice 2 goblins. I'm honestly fine with that. I'm honestly fine with keeping the board as clear as possible because I respect the possibility of a Bushwhacker effect off of the top. That would be potentially pretty bad. So I'm totally fine if our opponent wants to 2-for-1 themselves here, which I think is probably the right play, definitely nothing wrong with that. Yep, they 2-for-1 themselves, we gain a life. I'm fine with it. Now, I'm even more fine with it because I top deck a Liliana, the Last Hope. That, of course, is pretty incredible. Definitely really, really nice in this particular window. But I also would have been fine with a Maelstrom Pulse on the Legion Loyalist. I'm pretty stabilized, right? I'd be at 14. All they have is a Fanatical Firebrand. I've got a Treetop Village on the field, so even if this was a brick, I'm going to out-top deck them. And, yeah, so while you could have argued for a more conservative deployment of the Ooze, like maybe we just pulse play our Treetop and pass and then try to play the Ooze when it's a little safer, I think that was totally reasonable, and we are rewarded for it because now Lily the Last Hope gets to take over the game. Opponent is at the mercy of his top deck, and they find a Goblin Guide. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. It's not quite lethal on Lily the Last Hope, but it's definitely a start. So it's going to hit her down to 2, holds back the Firebrand, and, not finding many lands off the Goblin Guide, but we are finding more Liliana the Last Hopes off the top of our deck. So, this is a very interesting decision point. What do we do here? I think we just cash in our other Lily. As strange as this is, you will almost never voluntarily -2 her, especially this, it's still the mid-game. It's not like we have 8 lands on the field and our Scavenging Ooze can just immediately be bought back and played and then become a 6/6. Like, we're still a little bit medium on mana. This is a really unusual play, but because we have another one in hand, I think I am supposed to cash her in here, buy back a threat, and then play my other one. Definitely could debate it. Definitely could say we're just supposed to tick her up and force them to deal with her, and then we have another one in reserve. I don't know. Then they just ignore her and start attacking our life total, which maybe is good for us in the long run. But I think this is totally fine too. We could buy back a Tarmogoyf, which is really tempting, but I'm just going to buy back the Scavenging Ooze. I'm just going to buy back the thing that gains me life, because I'm respecting the whacker effects, the goblin grenades, things like this. Now we'll play the other Lily, the Last Hope. We'll get something off the board. It's not a clean kill because they get to ping her in response. But yeah, they don't have anything particularly appealing off the top, so that is just a scoop. A lot of value to try to fight through with the Liliana, the Last Hope, still on the field. Even if they manage to kill her over the course of a couple turns, she will have absorbed so much damage and effectively gained us so much life that we really should be able to just win the game sooner or later. They know we have our Scavenging Ooze in hand. This is going to be a really tough one for them to deal with. We also we're sandbagging this Maelstrom Pulse. It's just a nice out, just another piece of removal. So yeah, that was a stabilized Golgari deck for sure, if I've ever seen one. So if anyone's thinking that our opponent scooped a little bit prematurely, they were still at 20 life and all that, I don't think they did. I think they pretty much saw the writing on the wall. I don't think they're likely to be able to muster much against Lily here unless they got something really good off the top there. I don't know exactly what it could be. But yeah, certainly an interesting matchup here. This is kind of like Elves, and there are some other similar decks where Game 1, it seems like the matchup should be a little bit better than it is. We're a spot removal deck, right? We have 4 Fatal Push. That's more than most decks in the format can boast against these go-wide decks. We have some 2-for-1 potential with a main deck Pulse. We have some main deck Lilies. The matchup seems like it should be fine on paper against decks like 8-Whack and Elves, but these Game 1s, man, they can be tough. They're tougher than they look on paper. That is for sure. But just making our sideboard changes makes us so much more heavily favored in the post-sideboard games. Do not get discouraged if you get run over Game 1. Sometimes there's not much you can do. And even if your particular sideboard does not have a plethora of interaction for these decks specifically, just know that even shaving a few of our worst cards and bringing in a couple more pieces of any kind of removal is often going to be enough to tip the scales heavily in our favor. So, as you saw, all 3 of those games played out pretty differently. So, Game 1, they had a really explosive start. We couldn't quite stabilize. They killed us turn 4 through 3 pieces of interaction. We just got run over. Game 2, they took a mulligan and they had a bit of a cagey start, bit of an underwhelming start. They did hit us with a couple Goblin Grenades on the same turn. That was a big chunk of change as far as our life total goes, but then Kalidas just made the game his. Kalidas just completely took it over. And then Game 3, it was a little bit more even-keeled on both sides. Our opponent had a strong start, but not the absolute most explosive one like they had Game 1, partially because they were on 1 land for a few turns, and partially because we had the turn 2 Collective Brutality that was a really nice little way to stay in the game. And of course Inquisition on this first turn in these games has been completely fantastic as well. So I think we drew pretty well over the course of this series. Even our Game 1 draws were not bad. They were just not enough, but they were not bad. Yeah, so we drew well all 3 games, and here, this was kind of a traditional Golgari things, style progression. Inquisition into Collective Brutality into more spot removal into Liliana into another Liliana buying back threats, Scavenging Ooze gaining us some life, getting a 2-for-1, then getting bought back. Like, the amount that we were able to grind just kind of snowballed in these turns 5, 6, 7, and then that was pretty much too much for a deck like 8-Whack to overcome. So yeah, great games, well played to the opponent's Shocker Nation here. It was really cool to run into you in the wild, so to speak, and yeah, good stuff, man. Thanks again for your patronage, and thanks for being a part of the video as well. Yeah, that's about all for this matchup. Let's wrap it up there. Good games, well played. To the viewers, as always, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think about everything, and stay tuned to the channel, more gameplay to come. Have a great day.